Tonight we're beginning Siman Reish Mem Tes. And basically the next few Simonim we're discussing Dinam HaShaychim L'Erev Shabbos. Hachon Esudis L'Shabbos, Shlolasis Malacha L'Erev Shabbos. There are many Dinam applicable in Hilchos Shabbos that aren't necessarily with regards to Shabbos itself. A lot of Simonim are discussing Friday. So, the first sif discusses, Siman Reish Mem Tes, Ein Hilchim B'Erev Shabbos, Yoisem Megillah Parsos, you're not allowed to travel on Erev Shabbos. Yoisem Megillah Parsos, Kadesh Negil L'Beisa B'Oida Yom Gadol. You're not allowed to travel Friday morning after, Mr. Brewer says that Shlish HaYom, after Shlish HaYom, Gimel Parsos. From the time that it takes a person to travel from Neitz HaChama, right, Gimel Parsos, how much is a parsah? Anybody know how much a parsah is?
12.
A parsah is 4 mil. 4 mil.
What's 12?
4 mil. 3 parsahs is how many mil? 4 times 3 is 12. How many minutes is a mil? The poskim say a mil is 18 minutes. Now this is a hard one. How much is 18 times 12?
216.
216. Excellent. 216 minutes from Nates. That means you got 260 minutes from Nates till 260 minutes later that you could travel on Friday. That's Shlish HaYom. By the way, how many hours is 216 minutes?
3.5.
3.5, right? 3.5 hours. 3 times 60 is 180. Right? It's around 3.5 hours. Yeah. 3.5 hours. So basically, from Nates, for example, today was, what time was Nates today? 8:07, 8:07, 9:07, 10:07, 11:07. Around 11:30, that's around the time you shouldn't travel anymore on Erev Shabbos. That's the halacha Shulchan Aruch. Now,
What's considered traveling?
setting off on a, going on the motorway to a different place. If you travel in your car, just the other block, you're already in the Yishuv. Next to your house, that's not a big deal. But 3.5 hours into the day, there's an Isser of traveling. What's the Isser? It's not just an Isser, by the way, it's not just an Isser of driving a car. There were no cars back then. The Isser wasn't because you might break down. It was a totally different Isser. Even walking to a different village, to a different town, was Isser after 3.5 hours from Neitz HaChama. Why? It's a very interesting svar the Gemara says. What?
You get involved in
other things.
Stuff, and you'll forget about that.
Right, that's what you naturally say. But the Gemara says something very interesting. The Gemara says the reason is because if you are going to travel to a different town that late in the day, then when you get there, people won't be expecting you, and then they'll have to cook more food for you for Shabbos. And either they won't be able to because it's too late in the day and they'll be embarrassed to host you. They don't have enough food for you. Or even if you're going to your own house, right? Let's say you're away and you're traveling, you want to travel back to your own house. Again, you'll be upset at your bnei bayis why there isn't enough food for you for Shabbos. They didn't expect you to come home. And you realize there's not enough food. That's the halacha in Shulchan Aruch. Very interesting. So, of course, before we get to nowadays, whether this halacha applies nowadays, there's an interesting Bach. The Bach says, even in those days, that Gemara only discusses if one walks. If he's walking after 3.5 hours into the day, into Friday, after 11:30 on Friday, if the Nates was 8:07, he's walking at 11:45, he decides to take a jog to a different place, there's an issue that you might get there and get to a place where they didn't prepare food for you, and you're not going to be able to have an Einik Shabbos. But if you're the Seya Berechev or Ba'agola, which the Bur brings down the Bach, no Rechev, sorry. No cars back then. They say about Gola. He's only doing the Seya in a wagon. Right? So there, Mr. Brewer says, he could travel a few Acher Chatzos HaYom. If you're traveling with a horse and buggy, and of course nowadays with a car, then you can even set out even after Chatzos. And the poskim asks, the Machzor Shegel asks, what do you mean? Why? If the reason is because you might get there so late in the day they won't have time to prepare for you, what's the difference what your means of traveling is, whether it's by foot or because it's by a gola. Bottom line, you get there 1 o'clock in the afternoon, Shabbos is 3:30, 4 o'clock early, they're not going to have time to prepare food for you. You'll be mevatel mitzvah of Einik Shabbos. What's the difference what you're traveling with? So the Prima Godim seems to answer. Prima Godim says that we're also choishish that they're not going to be able to prepare food for you and you're going to have to help out. So it depends. If you are walking, right, then you're going to be tired and you're not going to be able to help out properly. Right? You're going to have to rest. So we have to include the time for rest. But if you're traveling in an agola, so you're not going to be as tired and you'll be able to help out properly, and therefore you can even travel after chatzais. That's if you're Megadim's teretz. But the place can say nowadays, this halacha doesn't apply for this reason at all. First of all, nowadays, the Magen Avraham brings that nowadays, people cook. You know, when they cook for their family, they don't cook exactly, you know, like 5 pieces of chicken, you know, for the mommy, tati, and the 3 kids, you know. They don't cook 5 pieces of chicken, right? They cook a bunch of pieces of chicken, right? Maybe someone's going to want doubles. So the Magen Avraham says that because the derech is to cook much more than you need, so there's no chashash. You'll get to a house, and they have anyways more food than they're used to having for the immediate family. The Kaf HaChaim, he says, the Magen Avraham is mechadish a svar on his own, and he says there is no such rishon. We don't find anywhere in the Rishonim such a svara, and therefore this is not a heter for one to travel after chatzos, after shlosh hayom. But Rav Yosef in his beautiful style, I don't know if you ever opened the Chazon Avadia and Yechavadas or Rabbi or whatever the svarim Rav Yosef authored. His derech is whenever he brings a makar for something, he brings like 25 at least mar mekaynos and sources. So he brings this Kaf HaChaim and he says that apparently in the days of the Kaf HaChaim, the Meiri and the Mama-Iris and so many others weren't published yet, so the Kaf HaChaim didn't see all the Rishonim that do say the Svara. And therefore, Chazon Avadia says that of course the Rishonim do say the Svara and you can rely on this heter because people usually make more food than they need to. There's another interesting Svara. Today we all have cell phones. So if you're traveling, right, and you are about to get to a place, right, you're going to get home, and you realize that they're not going to have enough food for you, you'll call on the way, and you let them know, listen, I'm coming home, prepare some food. Right? It's not a big deal. If you prepare them, you let them know, so they'll know to make more food for you. As soon as you set out on your journey, whatever, they'll make more food for you. That's another svara that they say that the svara lahakol. Another svara would be, even if they don't have, nowadays they have all these shops, you know, David's Deli or whatever, you can pick up a cholent, you know, for Shabbos. Even if they didn't cook enough food for you, you go to the local supermarket, and they have food. So basically, really, this halacha, the Sif Aleph, the Simon test, doesn't really apply nowadays. Because the chashash is that they might not have enough food for you, and you won't have food for Shabbos. Baruch Hashem, now, with cell phones and supermarkets, and all the other good things, and cars, we don't have this problem. A different place can say that this is not the problem we should be concerned with. Rather, there's a different problem one should be concerned with. Traveling Erev Shabbos Kodesh. And what's that? You might get stuck. Right? Yeah, I mean, I have an amazing story. I once got stuck on a Friday afternoon. And I had to get out of the car in the middle of a highway before Shabbos. And I remember, I'll never forget, I was traveling from New York to New Jersey, back to Yeshiva. And, you know, I left around 2 o'clock. Shabbos was 4:30. And I figured it takes usually an hour to travel back to Jersey. I said, okay, we'll go back. And sure enough, on Route 9, the highway which we took to get back to New Jersey was totally backed up. There seemed to be a light post fell onto the highway and there was traffic for hours. So basically I found myself sitting before Shabbos on the highway and I had my wallet and everything with me and there was a Geisha driver. And I said to him, listen, you know, buddy, listen, if you could just take back my stuff to the station and have somebody pick it up. I have to leave the car. He looks at me, you what? He looks at you, you're going to leave the car? He says, you know what you're doing? He says, listen, yeah, but my Torah says you have to, I can't travel. He says, listen, I'll make a deal with you. I says, I won't tell anybody. Yeah? So anyway, so it was a major Kiddush Hashem. I said, listen, it's not between me and God, it's not between me and other people. I don't really care if other people know. So I left the car, and then Baruch Hashem wasn't the only Yid that found himself in that situation, and I hooked up with some other Jews. And we started walking towards some Irani Dachas, and Baruch Hashem for Chabad. There was a Chabad house there. I'm always grateful for that Shabbos. But basically, we all have stories. I mean, if you leave, 2 o'clock before Shabbos, 2.5 hours before Shabbos, you might be chas v'shalom in a situation you never know, especially with traffic, especially with, cars breaking down. So it's sicher not advisable for anyone to drive after chatzos to anywhere, to any other place. There's an amazing story with someone, the Chazon Ish, that Chaim Kanievsky says over in one of the Sfarim, they quote him, that a fellow was once a big Talmud Chacham in Bnei Barak, once got into a major accident, and he was injured, critically injured. So the Chazon Ish heard about it and he was surprised. He said, Torah, such a Talmud Chacham, the Torah should be making on him. But then when he found out that he was traveling Friday afternoon, he said, that's the reason why he was injured, although he was such a Talmud Chacham. That's what they say in the Chazon Ish. So you don't have Torah Magna when someone does an Isser and travels right before Shabbos. There's another interesting story with Rabbi Yashiv, that his daughter's Levaya, Rabbi Leah Auerbach, she was the wife of Rabbi Israel Auerbach, and when she was Nifteris, her Levaya was on a Friday, and because it was outside of Yerushalayim, Rabbi Yashiv did not go to his own daughter's Levaya, so he shouldn't have to travel on a Friday Mechutz Le'ir. So that's a Chomer. The Gedolei Hadar seemed to take this Isser, and although it's not Mahur the Shulchan Aruch that you shouldn't travel on Friday because you might break down, it's a whole different reason, and that reason isn't applicable nowadays, but we should be aware that the Gedolei Hadar said, and there are many reasons. I remember when I was in Lakewood, I was living in Lakewood, I remember there was a story with a bus. I mean, there's countless stories. A bus full of Yidden traveled from New York to Lakewood. And unfortunately, they traveled on Shabbos. The driver didn't want to stop. He didn't want to stop in the middle of the highway. And he traveled on Shabbos, and all those Yidden, Mechal Shabbos, and it could be B'shaykik, but it was a tremendous Chil Hashem.
Is that a specific time, or is that any time on Friday, or is it just Friday afternoon? Isn't this is a problem?
Usually they say you should give yourself double the time it usually takes to get anywhere. That's the place can say. If it usually takes an hour to get there, give yourself at least 2 hours. And I tell you, give yourself at least 3 hours, because you never ever know. So when in doubt, do without. Okay, so we've shared an hour, so we'll stop over here.
How about the story with the Moshe?